I hate to hear when African Americans, African descent people from the Caribbean say, well, I'm black, but I'm not African American. We're all one and the same, and that division, divide and conquer, it's been an old rule that they've always used against us. So we're all in the same bucket.
Yeah, Dr. Maddox, now, we've seen the Caribbean community short in their numbers. A lot of them would have taken to the streets in Brooklyn recently to protest these murders. And I mean, it wasn't just George Floyd. It would have been the Ahmaud Arbery, the Breonna Taylor. We've had the latest one, Rashad. It really has caused people to turn out and call for and enter this sort of racist action against Black people in the United States. But the protests were peaceful. There was soca music playing, people had their flags, and they marched peacefully. So how does that really lend to how Caribbean people would have contributed to this sort of action, especially because Caribbean people have been particularly involved in the U.S. civil rights movement. We've had Marcus Garvey, Kwame Ture from Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, respectively, taking part in these sorts of demonstrations. How does this differ to the narrative that all these protests are violent and there's looting? What are your thoughts on what I just mentioned?
Okay, so I thought personally that the rally on Sunday was amazing to see. It was hosted by Caribbean Americans for Justice, and I believe the Caribbean Guyanese Institute for Democracy. And so they came together and told everyone to come down, bring your signs to show solidarity, bring your flags to show that we as Caribbean people, we are part of American history and we want to be part of the action to correct these injustices within the American system. So I thought it was amazing to see. It was very peaceful. It was a protest done only in the way that Caribbean people can do a protest.
Definitely.
There was soca music being played. There were people standing in solidarity with the larger Black community. And I just thought it was amazing to see. There were so many people that came out. I don't know what the official numbers are yet, but just from the pictures, I wasn't able to make it, but just from the pictures that were shown, it had to be at least tens of thousands of people. And
when I saw it,
yeah,
I said, oh my gosh, this is carnival, except without the costumes.
But with a little bit of a higher purpose.
Definitely a higher purpose. Yes, of course, that can't be ignored.
And I think it was, oh, sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and I think one of the issues that we often hear, oh, well, in the Caribbean, we are a racial democracy. We don't have these kind of issues of injustice in the Caribbean, which is not necessarily true. And on the larger scale, every Caribbean person has a family member that lives in the U.S. So there is a connection to the U.S. Even if we look at the case of Botham Jean, right? He is a St. Lucia national, and even his life was affected by this police brutality in the U.S., right? And so that sparked a larger issue and conversation about race in the U.S., race in the Caribbean. The fact that this Caribbean national who had come to the U.S. was murdered by an off-duty police officer. So I think just making those connections are really important for the Caribbean community.
Yeah, and it's important to note that when you mentioned the history of Caribbean people and the protest being in a way that only Caribbean people can protest, Carnival was born out of slavery.
Yes.
People took to the streets for that one period of time as slaves to participate in a peaceful sort of demonstration, and also a sort of mockery of their their owners and the plantation owners. And now we've seen it take place now in modern day protests in the United States. So it really was interesting to see. Now, Onika, my next question to you regarding the demonstrations that would have taken place in the United States. You mentioned earlier that there tends to be some sort of a disjoint between people who live in the Caribbean and people who live in the United States or other first world countries as it relates to being Black. How do you think people from the Caribbean who might migrate to the United States, migrate to England, Canada, address racism as opposed to people who would have been living there for ages?
I'm glad that you asked that question. we just like in any other cultures, there are many different subgroups, right? When from the outside looking in, you just look and everyone looks like they're black. But when we break the subcultures down, we have, you know, blacks from the Caribbean. We also have who say, oh, I'm not African American, I'm Afro Caribbean. We also have Africans from the motherland that refuse to identify with either African Americans or African Caribbeans. Give for example, when I went to college, I was rooming with an African American girl, and we had an argument. She said, you know what, you just need to go back to Africa. And I said, I don't understand, you know, because in Trinidad, you know, we all look the same. Hey, and I had just come to the US not too long. So definitely just being able to identify and appreciate the differences, but coming together in unity is important. I think until we are able as a Caribbean community to address and to be honest with ourselves, because you know, I will always bring up Trinidad and Tobago because that's where I'm from. When this whole issue with George Floyd started and people started to march in the streets in Trinidad and Tobago calling for Black Lives Matter, we've seen a lot of the comments on Facebook and a lot of the things that come back. They say, oh, you know, in Trinidad, every creed and race find an equal place. Why are we involved with this American system? But let's be real, you know, just like when we talk about Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, the first thing you have to do is to fix a problem is to address that the problem exists, right? When you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, the first thing you say is, hi, my name is whoever, and I'm an alcoholic. But I think the problem with the Caribbean and why a lot of times, a lot of people in the Caribbean feel like we can't identify with it because we're not willing to address the fact that we have our own racial problems, you know, in the Caribbean, especially in Trinidad and Tobago. We divide in political lines by race. And I don't understand why, you know, it rears its head when we start talking about politics. There's a racial base, and it doesn't matter how educated the person is, it doesn't matter what their qualifications are. We sit here and we look at, okay, well, I want this person because they're East Indian, I want this person because they're African, not looking at the fact that if when we come to America and we look at the binary system, we would all be considered people of color. The Indians in Trinidad, the Syrians in Trinidad, the African people in Trinidad, we're all people of color. So like, what are we arguing about? So I think for people from the Caribbean and other areas that just come to the US, it's kind of difficult for them to identify.
Like a culture shock.
Yeah, it's a culture shock. But I think after being here for years, and then of course having children, American children, because I have 4 American children in my house. They're Trinidadian descent, but they were born here. And seeing the differences in how they're treated and understanding that, yes, there is a disparity, not only in even finding a home. You know, when I first moved to Utica, New York, I live in an area, it's and Utica, and New Hartford is mostly white, and Utica is where most of the immigrants and the Black people live. However, when we look at how the school systems are funded, the schools in Utica don't have anything that they need. They hardly have any supplies. Kids have to test into AP courses. And then right across the line, literally across the train tracks, you have New Hartford, where my son is one of only 3 African-American children in his school. And they have international language labs and children. We moved from Texas where we had to test into, because we were in a Black community, the children had to test into AP courses, which is the advanced placement courses. Whereas in the white community, where we are, like I said, we're very much a minority, 1 of 3 students in the entire school, all the children are allowed to take AP if they want to. So when we look at systemically, when we bring that forward, for example, we can look at when it's time to apply for colleges. This child who was in the New Hartford system, or in a system where they are fully funded, their transcript looks pretty good. They get scholarships and everything. Whereas many of the African-American children who George Floyd opened up, but it starts from the bottom, even from housing to schooling to, we say that there's no segregation, but segregation is still real. It's just, you know, a different format.
Thank you so much.
Can I just add to that? I agree
of course
completely with you that the idea of systemic, right, is that it permeates in every aspect of American life for Black people, including all the areas that you mentioned: education, health, housing. It permeates every single function of American life for Black people. So I agree completely.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. We will be taking a short break now, and we'll be back after this.
Follow our latest updates concerning the novel coronavirus by checking our special content in our website, where you will be able to get the most reliable details and numbers for each continent, available from your mobile device or desktop. TeleSUR, connecting the Global South.
Welcome back. With me discussing the ongoing protests against the brutal murder of George Floyd and racism in the United States and around the world is Dr. Taisha Maddox and Onika Roach Campbell. You guys, thank you so much for staying with us.
Thank you.
Now, my next question will be directed to you, Dr. Maddox. With regards to capitalism, earlier I was mentioning to you before we started recording that a lot of businesses would have benefited from slavery in the United States and in the United Kingdom. A lot of these global countries, France, for example, would have benefited from colonization, which had its effects, implications for people living in the Caribbean who then migrated to the United States. What do you think can be done going forward to close the gap that has widened so greatly between poorer people who are of different races, poorer people of color, Black people, and white people?
So I think one of the demands of the protesters, one of the demands that aren't talked about as much, is that there's a real push for reparations. And this is not a new debate, right? This is not a new debate in the Caribbean or in the US. There have been committees put together and studies shown how reparations would immediately and effectively help these communities, lower income Black communities, in terms of pooling resources for health, education, housing, investing in Black communities, helping Black business owners. And I think that's definitely a way in which we can help close some of that gap. I think people who argue against reparations are saying that why should we give a cash handout to these people? What does that help? And I think we need to, one, not think of it necessarily as a cash handout. Yes, that is part of it, and it is important. But we need to think of the larger structural things that need to be changed within these communities to help. And I think that that is definitely a start. I'm trying to remember the rest of your question, though. I'm sorry.
It was really, you actually answered the question, because it was really to find out what can be done going forward to close the gap between people of poorer races, essentially, who are in the United States. I mean, what are your thoughts on the fact that these statues and street names and building names continue to exist post-colonization? What does this mean for African identity and for Caribbean people who really want to assume their own identities that are going forward?
Well, for one, I would like to say that, until the people that are unaffected by the issue start standing up and recognizing, because it's one of those things where Africans and also African Caribbean people, we're forced to live in this world that's not catered to us. So we're constantly having to, it's okay. Yeah, that's, this is a remnant of colonization. These people beat, murdered, looted, and killed our grandfathers and grandmothers. But it's okay that we have this big statue to them, in the middle of the square and things like that. So we have to look at the fact that what is the mental trauma that, as an African American, I am experiencing every time I see that statue, or I have to go to that school that's named after Christopher Columbus. you know. So we have to look at those issues, and until we look at those and we address those, people will always feel that a certain race is higher and a certain race is lower. Even in the example of the school system, you know, why is it that we in I'm addressing the American system, right? In February we have Black History Month, but why isn't Black history being taught in schools all year long? Why aren't we learning about the people in African American history that made contributions to the world as a whole? So as a child growing up, you're being programmed to believe that your people did nothing for the world, when we know that's not to be true. I remember even growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, and I went to Mova Anglican School, but I also went to high school at St. Augustine Girls, and it wasn't just at my school; it was just high school altogether. I don't know about you, but I don't remember learning anything much about Marcus Garvey or any
Yeah.
of these people that were instrumental in changing the world. So just like we spoke about earlier, and I think everything is going back to, you know, the system. So you have I think she mentioned earlier about the reparation,
Reparations.
right?
Hmm.
And people are saying, oh, you know, you're trying to come with this whole socialist. We don't need socialism in America. It's not about that. What we're looking at is people who have there's difference in wealth and being rich, right? Wealth is more of generational, right? It's passed down. So they use our people to build their countries, to build these systems, and to gain this wealth. And now we have no part in it. And a lot of people say, well, it's impossible to do that. How do we know who to send money to and things like that? I would agree, I would argue that that is not it's not impossible, because I work with the refugee community all the time. I am being an immigration attorney. So instead of, you know, gentrification, where you go into these communities and you take away property from poor blacks and you regentrify and then you sell it back to, you know, rich white people who have this generational wealth, why not do the same thing that you're doing for the refugees? Because African Americans are refugees in our own land.
Yeah. Dr. Maddox, how do you think Caribbean people could assist the wider African American community in pushing for change?
Oh, that's a big question. That's definitely a big question. Let me think about that. I think one in acknowledging acknowledging the racial injustice in our own communities first
Definitely.
is helpful in starting to recognize it in the larger world, that it's not just a issue in the U.S. So, for instance, I've been following closely, because I have a lot of friends in the UK, following closely the protests there. And while they are in solidarity with what is happening in the U.S. and ending the racial injustice and police brutality and over policing of communities in the U.S., the British protesters are also taking Great Britain at hand and saying, well, we're not perfect either. We have issues here. And the same in France with Black Lives Matters protesters who are protesting in France. They're saying, wait, let's look at ourselves first and let's fix what's happening here so that we aren't like what's happening in the US and we don't echo that. And so I think for the Caribbean, I think we can first acknowledge the issues that we have within the Caribbean and work to fix those issues. And then, of course, lending platforms to Caribbean Americans, trying to support the cause in any way that they see fit, whether that's volunteering time, volunteering space, volunteering or monetarily, sending money. I think there are a number of ways in which that could be done to show.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
So my last question to both of you, since we are running out of time. We've seen protesters now, a lot of the protests have been peaceful, but as well, a lot of people have been accosted by police officers who were violent towards them. It paints a different picture to the United States of America that as children, people in the Caribbean and third world countries would have heard about, especially what was perpetuated by the media. So the question really is, how will the events that are taking place in the United States at this point in time affect immigration trends going forward? How will Caribbean people perceive the United States And we can start with you, Onika.
Well, first of all, what I'd like to say is that it's already affecting. Right now, we have the USCIS, who is the organization that does all of the applications and things for people coming to the US, and they're funded by applications. So a lot of the people that used to be applying to come to the US, you remember in Trinidad, you have the long line around the savannah, and they take all the money, and maybe 2 or 3 people get approved for the day. But that's another injustice and another topic that we can talk about later. But right now, we already have where that agency is saying that they're going to run out of money and they're going to have to close their doors soon because they don't have enough applications coming in. So here we have, where Donald Trump and other politicians are saying, oh, we don't need immigrants, especially from these shithole countries and things like that. But it turns out that they actually do need the immigrants, and we are affecting, and where we spend our dollar is affecting whether or not they're able to keep the agency open. So what I'd say is that I have seen a downtick in the number of people that even want to come visit. Right now, I have people that are in the US that are trying to figure out how to go home, without being barred from coming back later when things get better. I think Caribbean people are wise, and we're looking at, okay, right now we're under a certain administration, and with this administration, this is happening. For the first time in history, we have a president who's actually in the bunker hiding from his own people, right? So the Caribbean people are recognizing and realizing that this is something that it's going on. It's probably going to last for a while, but it won't last forever. And they're refusing to spend their money on even attempting to come to America. Right now, they want to pay me to help them figure out how to go home without it affecting them.
Yeah. Dr. Maddox, your comments on that question?
So these are people that are literally risking their lives and their health so that we, the American people, can shelter in place and stay at home safely during this pandemic. They're also providing our food for us in terms of the immigrant workers who work in the agricultural industry. Yeah. So to say that these immigrants are not necessary is completely ridiculous. But back to your other question, this idea of what image of the US will this leave people with, I think this idea of America as being a place of opportunity, of having this American dream, I think it's seriously shown some holes in that theory the last few years. The fact that we're trying to protest peacefully, we're trying to assert our First Amendment rights to assemble, and police officers are violently shutting down protests that are not violent, that are not causing any harm. I think that shows that there are issues with this idea of America as being the place of equal opportunity, of being able to work by your bootstraps and be able to pull yourself up. When Breonna Taylor is working as an essential worker, an EMS worker, she's at home in her house doing everything right, and she's still killed. So I think that will definitely put pause to a lot of people before they think. And I've heard people say, well, I don't want to go to America. I'm Black. I'm going to get shot. And so I think there's going to be a lot more of that unless we do something serious to affect some change. I think these protests are starting to definitely turn that table right now.
And to add quickly to what you said, the comparison, right? Because we're peacefully or trying to peacefully protest, and we're being shot with tear gas and rubber bullets. But we recently had a group of white protesters who staged ran into the state building in Michigan with rifles, exactly. Right? Assault rifles. And they were treated, they weren't tear gassed, they weren't rubber bulleted, The
hypocrisy of that is that the president, when that happened in Michigan, he said to the governor, Governor Whitmer, he said, well, why don't you have a sit down with these people and meet them halfway? Yes. Yet when people are protesting peacefully outside the White House, he sends out the National Guard to
disperse them,
down, and he builds a fence around the White House. So the same way he said to Governor Whitmer, why don't you invite these people to have a conversation with them? Black people who are fighting for our lives. These people were fighting for haircuts and to go to a bar.
Right.
People who are fighting to end police brutality are shot down, well, not literally, but shot down and told, they can't protest.
Well, literally,
their constitutional right.
Bullets,
rubber bullets.
And with that,
they admitted to using chemical agents. They admitted to using tear gas. So
I mean, thank you both so much for joining us and speaking on this very real issue. We've heard so many times that the United States of America is the land of the free and the home for the brave, but really we are seeing an alternative reality with the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Rayshard Brooks. And it's important that we continue to highlight and put attention on these issues as Caribbean people who are also subjected to this sort of a racist system that exists not only in the United States, but other countries across the world. Thank you so much, Onika Roach Campbell, attorney practicing civil law, as well as an immigration attorney in the United States, and Dr. Maddox. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us. It was a pleasure.
And as such, we've come to the end of this edition of We Caribbean. For more, you can visit our website at telesurenglish.net, as well as we are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For We Caribbean, I'm your host, Doris Polo.
You're watching TeleSUR English. I'm Ernesto Dominguez, and these are the headlines at this hour. The Central Bank of Venezuela will appeal the decision of a British court that denied the Venezuelan government access to its gold reserves kept at the Bank of England on Thursday. The bank qualifies this decision of a British court as ridiculous and unprecedented. It also states the intention is to deprive the Venezuelan people of the necessary resources to face the COVID-19 pandemic. The verdict handed down by the Superior Commercial Court alleges that the British government unequivocally recognizes opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó as leader of the Bolivarian Republic. For their part, the lawyers represented the Central Bank of Venezuela in the lawsuit against their English counterpart announced that the appeal will be made because they consider the judges ignores the reality on the ground. Brazilian health authorities have stated that more than 60,000 citizens have died due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Brazilian Ministry of Health reported that 1,038 people died due to COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, which means that the death toll has reached 60,632. Health authorities also reported that over 46,000 people tested positive for COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. Brazil remains at the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic in Latin America and is the second most affected country in the world, with more than 1.4 million confirmed COVID-19 cases. The Egyptian government reopened the country's major touristic attractions on Wednesday as part of its so-called coronavirus coexistence plans to moderately resume work and production. Tourism, the country's pillar industry, provides job opportunities for over 1 million Egyptian families. While scenic spots are reopening, Egyptair has begun to gradually resume its services to some countries since Wednesday. Egypt reported on Wednesday more than 1,500 new COVID-19 infections, bringing the total cases registered in the country since mid-February to almost 70,000, according to the health ministry. Meanwhile, 81 more patients died from the novel coronavirus, raising the death toll to over 3,000. And those are the headlines at this hour. For these and more stories, you can go straight to our website, telesurenglish.net.
Toronto. From Caracas, I'm Laura Prada. Today we'll be talking with Elahe Nouri, professor at the University of Toronto. With her, we're going to be talking today about the friendship, about solidarity in times of COVID-19, and this special relationship between Venezuela and Iran, and of course, about oil, and how these two blocked countries help each other in times when they are struggling with the hardest strength and the strengthening of sanctions by United States imposed on them. Welcome to our show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Elahe, my first question. In 2009, Venezuela sent 20,000 barrels of oil to Iran when US sanctioned the country for its nuclear program. What does this cooperation mean in this year, in 2020, beyond this solidarity?
To talk about Iran-Venezuela relations, I prefer, first of all, to mention one point. Iran and Venezuela are friendly nations, I think, since 1950s under the framework of OPEC. So this means that both countries were familiar to each other from the past decades. But some happening in the history of both countries made both nations in order to not have that friendly or that good relationship with each other. But as we know, during President Khatami of Iran and during the presidency of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, both nations tried to reopen another chapter in their history. So they began to have a good relationship with each other, and this relationship has very good achievements during the presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in Iran and Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, which actually made a good environment for both countries in order to flourish their potential, especially the economic ones, under different frameworks, under different agreements, and also in different sectors, including technological sector and industrial sector, and also oil sector. And this means that, when in 2009, Hugo Chavez sent Iran some assistance. This was the act of showing how friendly both countries are at that time. But now, when Iran, during this pandemic, sends, or it's better to say, sends back oil or some tankers to Venezuela, this means that both countries are not only reaffirming their friendly relationship, but they are also talking with each other with the language of humanity. In other words, Venezuela during past decade was suffering from the grave or negative consequences of United States unilateral sanctions. And at the same time, post-revolutionary Iran was suffering from these sanctions, and it's better to say that is suffering from these sanctions. And when at this time, when the pandemic has involved different nations and different countries of the world, these oil tankers not only have the message of showing solidarity or friendly relationship between both nations, but also are showing the world that these two sovereign nations are acting in a normal way and are talking with each other with the language of humanity and are helping each other, because negative sanctions of United States unilateral negative consequences of the United States unilateral sanctions has involved the ordinary life of the people of both societies. The rising rates of unemployment and the shortages of basic food and medicines are not the issues that could not be considered or could not be, could be ignored in the ordinary life of people. So when Iran is sending these tankers in this time to Venezuela, although the physical aspect of these shipments are showing that both countries are trading with each other. But most important of all is that these tankers are showing the world that peoples of different countries of the world could help each other, especially during hard times. And I think that Iran and Venezuela are acting in a very normal way of helping each other and talking with each other with the language of solidarity and humanity.
Regarding Iran's 2015 nuclear deal, the US failed to comply with it. Iran continues its uranium enrichment program. Is this another sign of self-determination of the people?
We talk about the Iranian nuclear program. The country's nuclear program has been peaceful from the beginning. And but there were some reports that were showing that Iran is not respecting the laws imposed by IAEA or is not, compliant with the rules and disciplines of the international organization, including IAEA. But the point is that Iran with JCPOA and during its negotiations with world superpowers and world powers told the world that is not violating any international law and the program of the country is peaceful. But the point is that with withdrawal of Donald Trump without any explanation, without any, without any good rationale in order to show the world that, for example, Iran is not respecting the international law, is not respecting the laws formulated by IAEA. With this withdrawal, without any logic, without any rationale, Iran, felt that is under, another unilateral decision made by superpower in order to restrict the country, in order to restrict the activities of the country, while the nuclear activities of Iran are peaceful. So the country also became ready in order to accept or another mechanisms who could, especially those mechanisms, devised by European power in order to show the world that is compliant with the international laws and is not seeking any aggressive nuclear activity. But when the world powers showed that they are not respecting the laws, the international laws, so Iran decided to, to act in another way, seeking or pursuing its peaceful nuclear activities while letting the inspectors of IAEA to monitor the activities of the country. But the point is that now Iran has reached to the point that none of these mechanisms and none of these negotiations could help the country. And until the sanctions, the unilateral sanctions against the country are enforced, the country should take another actions in order to survive, in order to show the world that is, seeking a peaceful and, human-based activities in the international arena. So maybe our relationship with Venezuela is one of the manifestations of this good intent that Iran has. So I think that Iran and also the people of Iran are trying to, resist against any activity that violates their dignity and, questions the values of their revolution and try hard in order to defend their autodeterminations and their identity.
I have another question. The U.S. threatened to avoid this Iran-Venezuela trade operation by placing destroyers in this journey through this path in this maritime zone. Why didn't United States dare to carry out those threats?
United States is the hegemon, and is behaving in hegemonic manner, and thinks that could control different, territories of the world, different parts of the world, skies, earth, and different parts. But the point is that in the globalized world, economic integration systems and the political sovereignty of peoples are creating a new situation, in the sense that this hegemonic power needs to revise its rules and disciplines in order to control the world. In the sense that, for example, maybe United States could stop the trade or these shipments or this oil transaction between Iran and this gasoline transaction between Iran and Venezuela. But what is this country going to do with other nations, with the activities of other nations, and is always trying to focus on its interests by justifying these activities as a threat to its national interest in order to control the world. I think that this is the representation, these threats by the United States to impose sanctions or reconsidering or imposing new sanctions against different countries, including Iran and Venezuela, is the reflections of its hegemonic behavior. But the point is that actually the world during our time needs new rules, or it's better to say that this hegemonic power needs to revise its rules and disciplines in order to show the world that is superpower of the world. And Iran and Venezuela are acting in a normal way. They are trading with each other as normal countries, as sovereign countries. They are helping each other. This is act of solidarity. Iran and Venezuela are strategic allies of each other, so they're trying to help each other. But I think that as far as they are not violating any sea border, as far as they are not violating the sovereignty of any other nation, this trade is happening under very healthy framework. But if the United States is, treating the other countries by imposing new sanctions, this means that uh, the abnormal, or the country which is not normal, is the United States, because it's not respecting the laws, it's not respecting the healthy relationship between both countries. And I think that this behavior could not be continued, especially in this time, in this moment that the world is involved in pandemic, and different people in different countries, in different parts of the world need each other. And especially when the United States is also, involved with internal affairs with blacks, and on the other hand, the election that is coming, and these happenings are showing the United States that needs to revise its rules and needs to consider also the needs and the sovereignty of other people. So yes, this is normal. Threatening other nations to impose sanctions if they don't act in a manner that the United States wants. But the point is that this behavior could not be continued, especially in our globalized world, which different parts of the world are interconnected. And especially during this pandemic, when people are involved in health issue, not only, for example, in job issue, or the issues that are actually related to a normal life. People have many problems with their health issue, and I think that this behavior or this, imposing new sanctions is not serving, especially I think that especially during the year is coming when the world is going to be involved in this pandemic. And in general, United States needs to reconsider its behavior, its hegemonic behavior, because the world is changing, because the people of the different parts of the world are understanding each other, and this relationship between Iran and Venezuela is showing the world that people understand each other, and the hegemon needs to reconsider its rules in order to be involved, not only in its interest, but also in the interest of world, different parts of the world. And I think that maybe this is the United States that needs to reconsider its rules and disciplines.
U.S. presidential elections are very close. In fact, they are going to be in November. Could this picture change the U.S.-Iran-Venezuela relationship?
To talk about the United States policies regarding Iran and Venezuela, I have to refer to this point that it is not important if the president of the United States is a Democrat or a Republican. The point is that United States is targeting the governments of both countries, and always has mentioned this point that his enemy, or actually is behaving in a way to change the behavior of these revolutionary countries. So I think that yes, the presidential elections in the United States are coming, and different people in the United States and in the world are talking about the challenging situations that the United States currently is involved with it. But the point is that, in the case of Iran and Venezuela, I think that the only difference between a Republican or Democrat president could be, the policies adopted by presidents in order to, reach the objectives of the United States, which is changing the government of both countries. So I think that, in the case of the United States, there are many speculations regarding the situation of Donald Trump. But in our case, and in the case of foreign policy of the United States, the only thing that the sanctions has showed the world is that United States is trying to change the governments of Iran and Venezuela, and also some countries such as Nicaragua, and also with the situation in Bolivia. For example, I could refer to the phrase used by Bolton to calling Nicaragua, Bolivia, and Venezuela as a troika of tyranny in Latin America. And this is also true in the case of Iran, because they consider Iran as a threat to their interest in Middle East. So imposing sanctions by the United States, which are part of the foreign policy of the United States, I think that are not going to change by changing the president, because the United States is trying to change the behavior of our government, and the sanctions have showed the world this message. And so, I think that anything happens in the United States could have reflections in the policies adopted by the elected president, and the essence and the nature of the policy remains the same. They are trying to change the revolutionary governments of both nations, and it is not important who is going to be the president of the United States.
Thank you very much, Elahe, for being with us here from Caracas. This was our talk with Elahe Nouri, professor at the Tehran University. With her, we've been trying to talk a little bit to understand better how cooperation and solidarity in these difficult times of the pandemic, of the COVID-19 pandemic, and of between countries that are under sanctions, how this cooperation and solidarity is needed and is a way out of the difficulties imposed by these sanctions. Like this, we come to the end of this from Caracas. Thank you for watching, and for you, Elahe, for being with us.
Thanks for your time, and thank you very much for having me.
This July 5th, the people of the Dominican Republic participate in a new presidential election. Elections that present themselves as a major challenge for the nation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. TeleSUR brings to your screen all the information about this important event. And Daisy Toussaint brings you all the details around this day. In addition, find out the most relevant about this election through our website and social networks. Dominican Republic Decides 2020. Only on TeleSUR. In a world infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deepening into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on TeleSUR.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR. From here to beyond the South. From here to the Caribbean or further north. Where can I see news connecting the whole South? From Washington. From Mexico. From Caracas. From Quito. From Havana. You can always see the news from a new vision, connecting the global South. Only on TeleSUR. Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomy. Monday, only on TeleSUR.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR. Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomy. Monday, only on TeleSUR.
pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
The Central Bank of Venezuela will appeal the decision of a British court that denied the Venezuelan government access to its gold reserves. Majority of Russians approved the constitutional reform according to the country's Central Electoral Commission. In Myanmar, the bodies of more than 100 miners have been pulled from the mud after a landslide in the north of the country. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Ernesto Dominguez. The Central Bank of Venezuela will appeal the decision of a British court that denies the Venezuelan government access to its gold reserves kept at the Bank of England on Thursday. The bank qualifies this decision of a British court as ridiculous and unprecedented. It also states that the intention is to deprive the Venezuelan people of the necessary resources to face the COVID-19 pandemic. The verdict, handed down by the Superior Commercial Court, alleges that the British government unequivocally recognizes opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó as leader of the Bolivarian Republic. For their part, the lawyers representing the Central Bank of Venezuela in the lawsuit against their English counterpart announced that the appeal will be made because they consider that the judge does not know the reality on the ground. And regarding the UK High Court decision against the Venezuelan government, our correspondent in the United Kingdom, Pablo Navarrete, brings more details.
On Thursday, the UK High Court ruled against the Venezuelan government of Nicolás Maduro in a legal battle over who gets to keep approximately $1 billion US dollars worth of Venezuelan gold that is currently in the Bank of England in London. Now, the Venezuelan government of Maduro had filed this legal claim after the Bank of England has refused to return the gold to the Maduro government. According to the judgment, today the ruling said that, quote, the UK unequivocally recognized the opposition leader Juan Guaidó as president, unquote, rather than Nicolás Maduro. Now, the lawyers representing the government of Venezuela have pointed out that the UK has full diplomatic relations with Venezuela and has an ambassador there. So this would seem to be slightly nonsensical. Now, the ruling comes after the Venezuelan government launched this legal action to recover the gold, and certainly the High Court's judgment is a blow to the Venezuelan government as US sanctions in the country have really devastated the economy. Now, a report published in 2019 by the US think tank, the Center for Economic and Policy Research, said that apart from the economic cost of the sanctions, around 40,000 Venezuelans had lost their lives due to them. So this judgment really comes as a blow to the Maduro government, who have said that they will appeal against the judgment, according to lawyers of the Bank of Venezuela. And according to the UK investigative journalist John McAvoy, who recently exposed a secretive UK unit within the British government dedicated to the, quote, reconstruction, unquote, of Venezuela, the judgment showed that the judgment made a, quote, total mockery of the UK court system.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro congratulated on Thursday his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin and the Russian people on the popular plebiscite on the amendment to the country's constitution. The Bolivarian government issued a statement on Wednesday welcoming the results confirmed by Russia's Central Election Commission. President Maduro highlighted the exemplary demonstration of civism, political conscience, and deep commitment to the Russian people towards democracy, widely shown during the popular consultation. Venezuela also recalled its commitment to keep strengthening its alliance with Moscow, which aims to reinforce bilateral relationships and to reach major benefits for both nations. The Mexican Attorney General's office announced new information about the 43 students killed in Ayotzinapa. The Attorney General of the Republic, Alejandro Gertz Manero, said that a new reconstruction of the crime that occurred in September 2014 has already been done and that there is new information about what happened to the 43 students of Raúl Isidro Burgos Rural Teacher School in Ayotzinapa. The authorities know now where they were hidden, who tortured them, and what became of them. The Attorney General confirmed that former official Emilio Lozoya was the one providing the new information. Manero hopes that it will be possible to discover the network of financial and political actors who benefited from the bribes and resources generated by both Odebrecht and the Agronitrogenados company.
Esas órdenes de aprehensión solicitadas.
Mexico's Attorney General Office requested to a criminal district federal judge 46 arrest warrants against public servants for various regions within the state of Guerrero, all of whom are accused of forced disappearance and organized crime.
In the Dominican Republic, the presidential candidates have closed the election campaign ahead of Sunday's general elections. The political parties will have until midnight this Thursday to develop proselytizing activities in preparation for the electoral event to be held on July 5th, when the president and deputies to the country's Congress will be elected. After the lifting of the curfew announced by the national government, the presidential candidates have taken to the streets in search of votes to ensure victory, leaving aside the measures of distancing to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. To date, the Caribbean country has registered more than 33,000 confirmed cases and over 700 deaths. Brazilian health authorities have stated that more than 60,000 citizens have died due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Brazilian Ministry of Health reported that 1,038 people died due to the COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, which means that the death toll has reached 60,632. Health authorities also reported that over 46,000 people tested positive for COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. Brazil remains at the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic in Latin America and is the second most affected country in the world, with more than 1.4 million confirmed COVID-19 cases. In Haiti, the Toussaint-Louverture International Airport reopened this Wednesday and expects 4 to 5 flights and about 400 passengers in the next hours. For the next 15 days, the passengers who arrive will go into home quarantine and will continue to be followed up. Prime Minister Joseph Jout stressed that the airport has reopened under pressure from the diaspora for economic reasons, because it was no longer possible to continue to pay the staff in a closed airport. Jout also stressed that all the airports in the region have been forced to reopen, and Haiti cannot be at odds with this movement. And more Guyanese return on repatriation flight to bring Guyanese stranded in the United States home since they closed borders on March 17.
My father has a health condition, so I was definitely very concerned about going outside. I feel as if you're around people who have health conditions or they're at risk for COVID, you need to be extra careful, even if you may not seem so. People can be asymptomatic.
Hurting the rest of Guyanese that want to come home. So obviously you should put your correct information to just help out your fellow Guyanese, you know.
The Caribbean Court of Justice will rule on July 8 whether or not it has jurisdiction to hear an appeal filed by members of Guyana main opposition People's Progressive Party Civic in relation to a court of appeal regarding the disputed March 2nd regional and general elections in that country. Guyana's opposition leader Bharat Jadeo and Isfan Ali, the People's Progressive Party Civic presidential candidate, filed the appeal before the Caribbean Court for several reliefs, including an interpretation of the phrase "more votes are cast" in the Constitution of Guyana. The Court of Appeal, in its decision late last month, ordered that the words are to be interpreted as meaning "more valid votes are cast." The court also ordered the decision be stayed for 3 days. The applicants who were added as respondents before the Court of Appeal claimed that the decision was wrong for many reasons, including that of the Court of Appeal did not have the jurisdiction to hear and determine the notice of motion. And we are taking a very short break now, so stay with us.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on TeleSUR. In a world infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deepening into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on TeleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. Several months after the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 as a pandemic, the UN Security Council adopted a resolution on the issue, although divisions still remain. The resolution unanimously approved reflects the call of the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres on March 23rd for a global ceasefire to concentrate all efforts on the fight against COVID-19, which has already killed more than 500,000 people in the world. The Council also called on all parties engaged in armed conflicts to immediately make a humanitarian halt of at least 90 days to allow for the safe, continuous, and unimpeded delivery of vital assistance. But the text clarified that a ceasefire would not apply to ongoing military operations against extremist groups and other terrorist organizations designated by the Council. In Russia, the counting of the popular consultation on the constitutional amendments promoted by the national government advances. According to the country's Central Electoral Commission, with 100% of votes counted, 77.92% of voters have supported the constitutional amendments. The governing body also ensured the transparency of the entire process, reporting that citizens' participation in the popular consultation reached 65%. Among the amendments to the Magna Carta stands out the constitutional rank granted to the population's right to a pension, and also seeks to limit the presidential mandate to a maximum of 2 terms. And Russian election officials said on Thursday that almost 78% of voters in Russia have approved amendments to the country's constitution after all the votes were counted.
На общероссийском голосовании составило 67,97%.
Turnout at the nationwide vote is 76.97%. Results are the following. Yes vote 77.92%. No 21.27%. This is the expression of the people's will at the nationwide vote. The results are self-evident. These unprecedented measures have allowed us to prevent significant attempts of falsifications and ballot stuffing. They have limited to the minimum the amount of irregularities regarding the scale of the country.
The European humanitarian rescue ship Ocean Viking is waiting for a safe port to disembark 180 rescue migrants, more than 100 of whom were rescued 1 week ago, according to its director of operations. The 70-meter-long rescue ship Ocean Viking is run by the non-governmental organization SOS Mediterranean. The ship has rescued 118 migrants on June 25th and 63 more people on June 30th in 4 different operations. SOS Mediterranean's Director of Operations, Frederic Penard, said they were left in limbo without any indication of a port for disembarkation. Penard said SOS Mediterranean had sent 5 requests to Italian and Maltese maritime authorities for the port of disembarking to be reassigned, and responses had so far been negative. The foreign ministers of Germany and Croatia met on Wednesday as Germany assumed the EU Council presidency.
We see that expectations are high. We are telling everyone that we will probably not be able to solve every problem in Europe in the next 6 months. But we want to solve the most important problems, which are the basis for Europe to move quickly out of the economic through we have fallen into because of the coronavirus pandemic. And that this is done in solidarity, that we leave no one behind, because we in Europe are dependent that we are all doing well.
This Thursday, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian says China will take countermeasures against Britain if it presses ahead with plans to extend citizenship rights to Hong Kong.
Before Hong Kong returned to China, the United Kingdom clearly promised they would not grant United Kingdom residence right to British national overseas travel document holders. In total disregard of China's solemn position, the United Kingdom obstinately changed their position and offered a route for residency and citizenship for these people. This seriously violates its own promise, seriously violates international law and the basic principles governing international relations. China strongly condemns this and reserves the right to take further responses. All consequences will be borne by the United Kingdom.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson also urged the United States to stop interfering in internal affairs of Hong Kong.
The attempts by the United States to block the national security law are doomed to fail. We urge the United States to grasp the reality of the situation, strictly abide by international law and the basic principles of international relations. Stop interfering by any means in Hong Kong affairs. Stop advancing or implementing this negative bill. Otherwise, we will take strong countermeasures. All consequences will be borne by the United States.
And we have more stories coming up after this very final short break, so stay with us for more.
This July 5th, the people of the Dominican Republic participate in a new presidential election. Elections that present themselves as a major challenge for the nation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. TeleSUR brings to your screen all the information about this important event. And Daisy Toussaint brings you all the details around this day. In addition, find out the most relevant about this election through our website and social networks. Dominican Republic Decides 2020. Only on TeleSUR.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomism. Monday, only on TeleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. Palestinian authorities have announced a 5-day lockdown across the West Bank to prevent the COVID-19 spread in the country after confirmed infections raised to more than double following the easing of previous restrictions. Palestinian government spokesman Ibrahim Melhem said that starting from Friday morning, all governorates of the West Bank will be closed for a period of 5 days, adding that pharmacies, bakeries and supermarkets were exempt. The latest data from the Palestinian Ministry of Health said that more than 2,600 people had tested positive for COVID-19 since the illness was first recorded in the West Bank, compared with just 1,200 a week ago. Most infections were traceable to Palestinians working in Israel or Arab Israeli visitors to the West Bank, according to the Palestinian Health Minister Mai Al-Kaila. In Myanmar, the bodies of more than 100 miners have been pulled from the mud after a landslide in the north of the country in one of the worst ever accidents to hit the perilous jade mining industry. Caused by the monsoon rains, the landslides occurred at a jade mining site in Satemun village, tract of Hapkana Township at 8 a.m. local time. Hundreds of jade scavengers are feared to have been buried as the landslides occurred during their working hours, but exact numbers of casualties are yet to be known and rescue operations are being carried out. Deadly landslides are frequent in Kachin State, known as Land of Jade, especially in Hapkanat mining region. Many local people make living by jade scavenging in the region, and most of the landslides are caused by partial collapse of tailing heaps and dams. The Saudi-led military coalition confirmed on Thursday it was launched a major operation against Yemen's Houthis and warned it would target the rebel leadership following missiles and drone attacks in the kingdom. Residents of rebel-held capital Sana'a told through their media they heard loud explosions after at least a dozen airstrikes on the international airport, which is close to an Air Force base. The Houthi rebels have denounced that the Saudis had launched 57 airstrikes on Sana'a and their northern stronghold of Sada, where a woman and a girl were killed and a number of children were wounded. The coalition strike effectively ends the unilateral ceasefire it declared in April, announced as part of efforts to combat the coronavirus pandemic. Yemen has been locked in conflict since the Houthis took control of Sana'a in 2014 and Saudi-led coalition intervened in the country, causing tens of thousands of people killed and millions displaced. The Egyptian government has reopened the country's major tourist attractions on Wednesday as part of its so-called coronavirus coexistence plan to moderately resume work and production. Tourism, the country's pillar industry, provides job opportunities for over 1 million Egyptian families. While scenic spots are reopening, Egyptair has begun to gradually resume its services to some countries since Wednesday. Egypt reported on Wednesday more than 1,500 new COVID-19 infections, bringing the total cases registered in the country since mid-February to almost 70,000, according to the Health Ministry. Meanwhile, 81 more patients died from the novel coronavirus, raising the death toll to over 3,000.
We are taking very strict and scientific measures to protect our guests from all over the world, in the resorts, in the hotels, and the archaeological sites and museums.
The government of Chad has closed universities and schools, places of worship, and some businesses to halt the spread of the coronavirus. Although no total confinement of the capital in N'Djamena has been ordered, it has been enough to destabilize the fragile economy of the country, which has remained among the poorest in the region. In the landlocked Central African country, the day after the first case of coronavirus was announced on 19 March, the government ordered a series of relatively strict measures from all the nation. To date, the authorities have said they have detected just under 900 cases of coronavirus and reported 74 deaths.
Now it's up to us to be aware of the barrier measures. We put those hand-washing devices. The customer comes in and washes his hands, and he has his little meal in the corner. He is alone or a couple. They eat and leave. Then we can say you made something. But as it is now, it's already been a week, and there are days that no one buys anything and just leaves. The person says he can't buy a takeaway.
Locust swarms have devastated parts of northern Kenya. Insects flew west from Yemen, reaching Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia this year. Locusts have hatched in Turkana, Kenya's poorest region. The hatchings have occurred as crops are planted in a region where 20 million people struggle for food. Swarms of locusts have swept through Kenya and Ethiopia since January, devastating fields, pastures, and livelihoods. Despite government efforts, effects have continued to breed in their billions, threatening whole economies, which are also being battered by the COVID-19 pandemic. Numbers of locusts exploded in the East Africa and the Red Sea region in late 2019, exacerbated by atypical weather patterns amplified by climate change.
So the issue without doing control of locusts now is basically they will form big swarms and have the risk of going into the bread baskets of Kenya in the south, and that will affect food production for the populations and the future of Kenya. These infestations are pretty serious. Kenya 2020 has suffered already quite a lot with floods, of course COVID-19, and now the desert locust infestations that we seem to be finding everywhere.
Ongoing unrest in Ethiopia have left 80 people killed after the assassination of popular musician Hakalu Hundessa, a popular voice during protests by the Oromo, Ethiopian biggest ethnic group. The military was deployed in the Ethiopian capital to prevent the protests, which according to the regional police commissioner Bedasa Mardesa have resulted in the death of 78 civilians and 3 members of the security forces. Also calling the attention of activists and social organizations in the country, the unrest proposes new political divisions affecting the position of current Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. In federal Ethiopia, power is traditionally derived through controlling large ethnic voting blocs. On July 2, 1925, one of the most important African leaders in the history of the continent was born in the former Belgian Congo, Patrice Lumumba. Today, TeleSUR would like to remember one of the precursors of African emancipation and that of the Third World.
Lumumba, leader of the Congolese National Movement Party, served as the first Prime Minister of the Independent Democratic Republic of the Congo from June until September 1960. and played a significant role in the transformation of his country from a colony into an independent republic. Patrice Lumumba was a key leader in the struggle for the liberation of African peoples, advocating for independent governments on the continent to provide aid and support to countries that have not yet achieved their freedom. For that reason, in December 1958, Lumumba attended the All African Peoples Conference in Accra, Ghana, one of the first meetings to boost the Pan-African liberation ideals, and hosted by other African father-founder, the Ghanaian president Kwame Nkrumah. The Pan-Africanist leader was murdered by a conspiracy organized by the Belgian government, with the complicity of the governments of the United States and the United Kingdom.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And as I always say, join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Ernesto Dominguez. Thank you for watching.
मतलब दिसता स्ता मतलब दे जब मरगुनु बदा तमकम स्ता नाम चानशा खस्ते दा ए माई औ दा ए साई नाम खस्तल दोई वजबुल कत्ल गुनाश मरवलो पडाड या दरता खलम पयार या दरता खलम
जनाब साहिबजादा कासिम सियाल साहब
Good evening and welcome to the world today. We're going to be discussing the birth of a new movement in Pakistan, which is different from all the existing political parties in the country, and which has developed very quickly in response to the continuing assaults on the Pashtun communities in Pakistan after 9/11. With me today are Zakir Hussain, one of the leaders in Britain of the new Pashtun movement, the Pashtun self-defense movement, or the Pashtun protection movement, as they still call it in Pakistan, and Mahvesh Ahmed, who studies at Cambridge, is doing a PhD there, and has been centrally involved in building solidarity amongst non-Pashtuns and the global left to understand what is going on. The history of Pakistan is, of course, a tormented one. This is a country whose military refused to accept the verdict of the people in 1970 and preferred to divide the country by waging a brutal civil war in East Pakistan, which subsequently became Bangladesh. the condition and position of the minority provinces in what was left of Pakistan has never been a healthy one. They've constantly been under fire, bribed, cajoled, imprisoned, tortured, and this is a process which has been going on for some time. 9/11 and what followed made it worse. And the reason it made it worse is because the American occupation of Afghanistan saw a huge assault on the Pashtun communities in Afghanistan and Pakistan. The communities, the Pashtun tribes, divided from each other by British rule and the imposition of the Durand Line, which divided Pakistan from Afghanistan. Prior to that, movement between the two parts of the country was very open. But effectively, the area has been under martial law, under military rule, despite the political facade, because it's a strategically extremely important area in the country now. And the people who have been suffering the most in Pakistan are the Pashtuns. This is the historical background to what is happening now, that after long years, a national movement has emerged, the Pashtun self-defense movement, whose aim is very straightforward: to defend the human and civil rights and social rights of the Pashtun people. And the interesting thing is that with the Pashtun spread all over the country, huge Pashtun population in Karachi, in Lahore, in other cities, internal migration in the search for jobs when the country was being industrialized, there have now been large gatherings of Pashtun people in Karachi, in Lahore, and of course in Pakhtunkhwa, which is the Pashtun province in the country, or part of it. The rest is in Afghanistan. Both of you welcome. Zakir, I'll come to you first. Explain to me the origins of the movement, what triggered it off, and how it grew so quickly with popular support.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much. Pakhtuns have been on the geographical location which has always been very hot area, historically speaking, geographically speaking, and strategically speaking. After the death of Naqibullah Masood.
Who was Naqibullah Masood?
Naqibullah Masood was a very common social media.
He was a model.
Yeah. It was due to corruption of the police, corruption of the organizations. And he was taken and then martyred, and then he was killed. But after his death, it was disclosed that it was not only Naqibullah Masood. There were more than 400 Pakhtuns, boys, young boys, who had been killed. So when that came out in Karachi, there was a concern about, and people were thinking about it, that where are other missing persons who have been taken from that tribal area, from Swat area, from other areas. And it's astonishing that almost 34,000 persons are missing.
So the total figure of those disappeared, probably killed, is 34,000.
34,000. Okay. So those all things, those all concerns, those surfaced. And it was a spontaneous movement which was launched by the ordinary Pashtun youth by themselves, taking no sort of guidance from any political party. It was a spontaneous movement. And you know, the movement is the best teacher, it's the best guide. During the course of the movement, they got trained on political issues.
They learned through their own experiences.
Yeah.
So who would you describe as the leaders of this organization, and what is their age group?
The leadership itself is definitely Manzoor Pashtun, who's 27 years old.
Yeah.
He comes from
Masood.
he is from the Masoods, and he is part of a generation of young Pashtuns from what is called the tribal areas. an area still governed under colonial era laws of collective punishment, areas that around the world are known for drone bombardments, for being suspected of being hubs of militancy. He is of the generation that have escaped because of war, these areas, and been forced to live in refugee camps. And there is literally, has been a huge outmigration of young Pashtuns, of so-called, from these tribal areas to other cities around Pakistan because of this war. And every time they come to these other cities, what happens is that because of existing racialized tropes about the Pashtuns as backwards and tribal and terrorists, you have other ethnicities, especially Punjabi, which is the majority ethnicity of which you and I are a part, that they say we don't want Pashtuns here. There's huge amounts of ghettoization because of that. Similarly, in 2014, when the Pakistan Army launched a massive operation called Operation Zarb-e-Azam in Waziristan, what we saw, and this was an operation that was launched, with the full support of Barack Obama and David Cameron, with the full support of all of the foreign correspondents, all of the diplomats, because the idea was, we're going to get all of these militant groups. People were not warned. They were bombed in the middle of the night. 1 million people had to flee by foot in the middle of the summer for 3 days. I reported in the refugee camps that they arrived to, there were people whose children had died on the way. There were people who had lost brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers. And a lot of these Pashtuns who had run away, and this is the kind of generation that both the leadership and a lot of the people taking part in the protests are from, when a lot of these people arrived and afterwards tried to leave these refugee camps, they were met with blockades in all of the cities with chief ministers and politicians saying, we don't want them to settle here, even though these people are technically, absolutely Pakistani citizens and have every right
to live wherever they want.
Yes. We even saw the very famous filmmaker Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy tweet out that she doesn't want them to come to Karachi. And she was harangued and criticized for that. The kind of racialized tropes about Pashtuns is widespread in Pakistan and justifies a lot of violence by the military, but also by a lack of empathy and a lack of knowledge about what's been going on in the rest of the country.
The situation is very different, but upper middle class reaction to the Bengalis was not so different in West Pakistan. Yeah. Especially in Karachi, in some of the Punjabi cities, people felt we're superior to the Bengalis. Our skin is lighter. The Bengalis, after all, are only recent converts to Islam, unlike us. Total nonsense, by the way. And they can't quite say that about the Pashtuns because, the Pashtuns, if one's going by skin color, are fairer. But what they can say is that these are tribal nobodies, upstarts, and a class attitude begins to play. Do we want these people in our city? I'm very shocked what you've said about Chinoy, that she tweeted out like this.
The same thing, the other group that's being disappeared, the Baloch, also face similar kinds of accusations of being backward and tribal and hierarchical. But what's interesting about both of these communities that have been violated, disappeared, killed, tortured, is that when it comes to progressive movements and organizing, they have a huge and long history of progressive organizing. So young Pashtuns, especially the ones turning out now, are organizing in the streets against the military. That is an incredibly radical thing to do in Pakistan. To speak that openly against the military is incredibly radical. In the same way, in the Baloch areas, you have had actually a huge mobilization among Baloch women who have come out, and because boys and men get picked up, Baloch women are now the faces of the missing persons movement. And that defies all of the stereotypes about these communities as backwards and tribal, etc. And in fact, what instead you see is a deeply radical progressive challenge to a patriarchal, capitalist, imperial-supported state and military state.
What are the demands of the movement now? the Pashtun self-defense movement. In terms of the state, let's say the state sends someone to negotiate, saying, what do you people want from us? What would the demands be? Zakir, why don't you say
very simple demands, very, very simple. First demand was and is regarding the killing of Naqibullah Masood. The culprit has been arrested, but treated as if he is a state guest.
Who killed him?
It was a police officer in Karachi.
Rao Anwar?
Rao Anwar.
Well, Rao Anwar is a well-known semi-fascist thug who's been responsible for killing lots of people.
And he is a tool for the military. Yeah. We know, everybody knows. Who is protecting him? It is the military who is protecting him. The first demand is regarding him.
So that's the first demand, that the police officer Rao Anwar, who killed him, is tried properly and
tried and investigated properly.
Okay, that's the first demand.
This is the first demand. Okay. Second demand is regarding the checkpoints, the checkposts
in Pakhtunkhwa.
In Pakhtunkhwa and tribal areas, both. That is really an example of disgracing a person, humiliating a person, a nation, woman, children. Equally, everybody is disgraced and humiliated there on those checkposts.
Not to take away the dignity of the people from them, which happens at all checkpoints. Palestine, Israel is a key example. So what you're suggesting is that what is going on in the Pakhtun areas is very similar to that.
Yes. And the third demand is, it is regarding the missing persons. And the demand is very genuine. It is that, okay, bring them before the court according to law. Because the Pakistani constitution says that nobody can be arrested and kept under custody more than 24 hours unless he is produced before a magistrate. After 24, you are bound to produce him before a magistrate. But scores of years have passed and there are people who are missing.
Mavesh, if we are to try and build a solidarity movement with the Pashtuns on a global scale, introduce them to progressive movements elsewhere, what would your main arguments be?
Well, the first thing that I've found very interesting in terms of organizing solidarity work with the Pashtun self-defense movement is that despite a lot of organizing all over the world against the war on terror, against imperial intervention, there's surprisingly little that people know about Pashtuns, despite the fact that Pashtuns were one of the first victims of 9/11. We have a lot of people talking about drones on the global left, and a lot of people talking about US funding for militaries like the Pakistani military. We had a lot of people talking about the Afghan war, and yet nobody knows who the Pashtuns were. And so the first work of solidarity is, of course, to learn about one another and to learn about the sort of lives and homes and experiences of the Pashtuns of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and of course, in this moment, particularly Pakistan. The second thing is, of course, to learn. I mean, it actually makes sense to just be aware of the fact that of the numbers in terms of how many people have died in Pakistan are, of course, unclear a lot of times. But one number, roughly, we can say that of the around 60 to 80,000, and it's unclear.
As a result of both Pakistan military assaults and the United States attacks?
And yes, and militancy. At least 75% have died just in the Pashtun areas. So what you have is Pashtun populations caught between three forms of violence. You have Pakistani military violence, imperial violence, and the violence of militancy groups. And the ones who primarily get killed are Pashtun peoples. The other thing is that, of course, the Pashtun movement itself has been linked into global left networks for huge parts of its history.
But the thing is this, that we have to be very concrete now. for most people, the idea of a Pashtun movement is the Taliban.
Yes.
Who are Pashtuns, there's no doubt about it, many of whom were trained in Pakistan, sent into Afghanistan, won a lot of popular support, whether we like it or not. So one can't cover all this up. One has to see how this happened, why it happened. And the fact that the United States hasn't been able to defeat them till now, despite this long occupation, is precisely because the Taliban, in their own religious way, represent a form of Pashtun defense.
There's a very interesting quote in Manzoor Pashtun, who's the face of the movement, in his speech in Lahore, where he says, soldiers and the Taliban are victims of the generals, and we, all of us, are victims of the soldiers and the Taliban. And what you kind of hear from that is that I think we need to have a much more complex conversation about the Taliban. The Taliban are definitely, there's a militancy going on. And of course, Taliban specifically means student. And so there's people who do, I mean, so there is, at the heart of both of this conflict between, on the one hand, militaries and on the other hand, militancy, is an elite of generals who play them up against each other, and in the middle of it, ordinary people get caught.
The point I'm trying to make is that we live in an epoch where the left has suffered huge defeats. And in this vacuum, when there is no progressive force available or ready or willing to take the lead, many other people do it. People who are not progressive at all, like the Taliban and like others. And this is a separate question, of course, but the absence of the left is linked to the whole collapse of the Soviet Union, etc., etc. But in the situation which exists today, I would argue that the emergence of the Pashtun self-defense movement is a very interesting sign of the first time spontaneously many Pashtuns who are neither in favor of religious militancy, who are not in favor of collaborating with the United States and the Pakistan Army, have come together and are agitating, marching in the streets of Pakistan, not Afghanistan. And that, I think, is quite significant, because if this carries on, it will spread into Afghanistan as well, without any doubt, sooner or later. So is there any form of organization, because even self-organization is organized?
Yes, organization is very necessary. And this is too much a heterogeneous type of movement, that there are people from different political ideologies in this movement.
Of course.
And those ideologies can't be, I think it will be not a good treatment to it to bring it into
one party.
One party or
That's
one
impossible.
thing. Yeah,
National
impossible.
movements are always like that, by the way.
These are genuine problems. The genuine problems is that we know, as you told, that there were Taliban were Pashtuns. But this was a force made and created by on the first place by the international imperialism, and on the second place by the Pakistani military.
Yes, no doubt about that.
Yeah. The operations were oriented against the people. No operation was never oriented against Taliban or any insurgency. It was against the people.
By the Pakistan Army.
Yeah, and in Pakhtunkhwa and Pakhtun areas, there was, I can't relate those stories. This Ali Wazir, by himself, his 17 people of his family were killed. 11 of them on one day. And Ali Wazir was arrested by at that time he was under custody. So they brought him under handcuffs to his father, uncle, cousins, brothers, nephews, all of them. They were murdered the same day. They were killed the same day. So against that, the people would come. It was very natural that, yes, there was left element. In absence of left element in that moment, that would have not been organized in such a fashion. Yes, everywhere, left was there.
But the left is very small.
Very small. Anyways, its guidance was it was really valuable guidance.
Yeah. The leadership of the PTM movement has a collective, as Zakir Lala explained, a collective of people from different political parties. And many of those political parties are Pashtun left-wing people who have a long history, come from families with long histories of left organizing. And they've played a key role in doing corner meetings around the different cities and rallying people to make sure that they show up. So even though it's small, it's also incredibly significant in ensuring that you have a very, very clear message coming from the PTM movement as well, which has been, you mentioned constitutional rights. It's been release our disappeared, stop putting checkpoints and harassing us on checkpoints, stop killing us in encounter killings, bring those who are disappeared to courts if there's any accusations against them, otherwise release them. These are kind of very clear and very basic demands that the movement are making, and the kind of guidance that, or the decisions being made are being made by a lot of key left Pashtuns.
Okay, let's have last questions now. Do you think the movement in Pakistan is going to be able to achieve its goals on its own, or will it need to win over other parts of Pakistan, the Punjabis, the Sindhis, to their cause before any change is possible?
I think no movement can do it, particularly in a situation in Pakhtunkhwa. No movement can do it with a solo flight. It will need other people. It will need people from other nationalities. Particularly, the only people who would help are the progressive people of the country. This is straightforward the thing. No rightist is going to do anything regarding the lives of the people and other things. It is the left which will be doing all those things. Though it is very small enough, but it can cultivate a thought there. And that thought is very powerful. It can only be done through those people. And international solidarity, as Mahesh said.
Mahesh, what do you think we can do in the United States and Europe on this question? It's unknown. People don't know it. They don't want to know it. I find by and large that these days so much has changed. We talk about the Pashtuns in Pakistan. I mean, under 2 million people have died in Iraq. People are dying in Syria every day. 30,000 people were killed in Libya. Because of the way in which these countries are run, the citizens get exhausted, tired, the news isn't reported properly, so it's very difficult. So what would you suggest on this?
I mean, of course, there's the issue of sort of overexposure to all of these stories.
Not to mention Palestine.
Yeah, Israel. Palestine, Syria. Now, the first thing to remember is that when it comes to Pashtuns, particularly, there are huge Pashtun communities all over the West. They make up a significant portion of refugees coming into both Europe and the US. And what we're seeing actually is that Manzoor Pashtun, the leader of the PTM movement, is doing speeches on the phones to migrant communities and workers here in Birmingham, in London, in New York, in Copenhagen, and all sorts of places. Because these migrant communities are from working class communities, they come as a working class. Unlike, for example, Syrian refugee communities, Palestinian refugee communities who maybe have some sort of highly educated, very sophisticated people coming in, these are actual working class communities. And so the first thing is to connect with existing communities that are already organizing around the PTM movement and doing solidarity rallies already around the Western world. The other thing is then figuring out, what kind of support can one, as a non-Pashtun and as non-Pakistani, give movements like that. And that can be helping with media exposure, helping with putting in requests or putting pressure on Western governments. Because on the one hand, you have these governments talk about human rights, and then on the other hand, you have them giving, funding them in other ways. So one of the solidarity work that is possible is beginning to question governments in the UK and the US, especially, about the kind of support they give for the military, about what sort of demands they have made on the Pakistani military around disappearances and extraordinary rendition, and filing various kinds of requests to figure out what exactly has been going on. The different WikiLeaks and lots of other leaks around what's been going on has showed us that Western governments have constantly and always collaborated with the Pakistani military on getting lists of names of who crosses the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. That's been a normal thing, getting full lists of who might be potential suspects, and of getting people delivered who they need to black sites. So these are, the PTM movement has its hands full in Pakistan, in marching there. But the Pakistani military doesn't just exist, in a vacuum. It exists with a huge amount of support, and it's completely been inflated. In fact, if you look at funding to the Pakistani state from 47 on, it was not until 2008 that American funding, American funding has only come to Pakistan under military regimes in that entire period. Every time we switch to a democratic regime, it goes to zero. And most of the funding goes to the military, and it goes to surveillance equipment and weapons equipment that gets used on the bodies of ordinary Pakistanis.
Zakir and Mavesh, thank you very much for coming. It's a conversation we will continue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
او کنا ته خامخا ما ته بدماش جوړیږي خامخا غونډګردي کوي خامخا ما وجني دښمني را سره کوي ولې نه پوهېږي موږ د تېرې یوه میاشتې راسې دا پښتانه را پاسېدلي هم دي خبرې هم کوي او ریاست له تر اوسه پرې ځان کوڼ کړی دی دغه خبرې که څوک اوري د ریاست اعلی ادارې هغه د ځان پوه کړي لږ د سترګې کولو کړي غوږونه دې کولو کړي پښتون را پاسېدلی دی دا د خلکو را پاسېدل نه دي دا د ظالم ګروان ته د لاس ورنږدې کېږي د پښتانه
Y creo que todos nos preguntamos, pues, ¿dónde está el gobierno? ¿Dónde está la autoridad? ¿Dónde está la justicia? ¿Dónde está Dios?
Después de 3 años del ejército en las calles, tuvimos 11 veces más asesinatos.
Diles que no me maten, Justino. Anda, vete a decirles eso, que por caridad, así diles.
Amado Avendaño Figueroa no debió morir.
Joaquín García Jurado Carmona no debió morir.
Los Zetas se han extendido por la costa este personas torturadas y asesinadas.
De más de 200 inmigrantes en San Fernando, Tamaulipas.
La lluvia de muertos, heridos y desaparecidos cae como una lluvia maldita. El desfile interminable de fusilados en la calle, de imágenes de gente colgada en los puentes, de decapitados abandonados en las veredas, se suma cada día a las estadísticas de la violencia mexicana heredada de la estrategia de lucha contra el narcotráfico aplicada por el expresidente mexicano Felipe Calderón y respaldada por Estados Unidos.
De México, digamos, hoy en día nadie habla de menos de 85,000 muertos y también, aún cifras oficiales, no son menos de 27,000 los desaparecidos. Entonces sí, es más que un drama, es un exterminio masivo y además selectivo, porque permanentemente en México hay una eliminación selectiva de activistas sociales, de reporteros, de defensores de derechos humanos.
Hasta no hace mucho, la sociedad estaba sumida en un extraño silencio. Pero un estallido más, entre tantos semejantes, un puñado de muertes más, se volverá una revelación colectiva.
¡Que me devuelvan a mi hijo! ¡Que me devuelvan a mi padre!
La muerte, a finales de marzo de 2011, de Juan Francisco Sicilia, 24 años, hijo del poeta mexicano Javier Sicilia, asesinado por el crimen organizado junto a otros 6 muchachos en el estado de Morelos. Javier Sicilia encarna desde entonces en la piel y en los huesos las transformaciones de la sociedad mexicana.
Asumo a través de la muerte de mi hijo la muerte de todos. Desde este momento, todos los muchachos asesinados en este país, que son la mayoría, son mis hijos.
De la muerte de su hijo, Javier Sicilia hizo una causa, pero no la suya, individual, sino la de todas las víctimas de la guerra mexicana.
Queremos justicia.
Gracias por estar con nosotros, señor Sicilia. Gracias porque ya estamos viendo que no estamos solos. Y si un día amanezco muerta, gracias porque voy con mis hijos.
Y yo salí a dar una palabra. Algo sucedió a partir de esa palabra y a partir de las movilizaciones que ya se habían dado antes de que yo diera esa palabra.
Javier Sicilia salió a la calle a reclamar justicia por su hijo y por las decenas de miles de víctimas que la narcolucha había dejado en el país. A partir de allí nació uno de los movimientos sociales pacíficos más fuertes del último cuarto de siglo. Marchas, caravanas a lo largo del país, poco a poco México fue abriendo los ojos ante el horror con el que convivía. De esas marchas surgió un grupo, el Movimiento por la Paz, con Justicia y Dignidad, y con él las caravanas que recorrieron el país recogiendo la palabra antes silenciosa, la de las víctimas, quienes fueron recuperando no solo la palabra, sino también la dignidad y a veces sus derechos.
Una especie de milagro cívico nacido del horror, de la tragedia.
Era un poeta el que estaba moviendo a México. Eso no se había visto. Se había visto justamente, ¿no? en otras trincheras.
Y yo creo que lo que se despertó allí a partir de esa muerte, de la muerte de mi hijo Juan Francisco y de sus amigos, fue despertar la reserva moral del país, que estaba dormida, sojuzgada, ahogada, pero viva.
Fue un desafío colectivo al Estado, que no se hacía responsable, y a los narcos, que ejecutaban a miles de personas a la sombra de la impunidad. La poesía fue, en este movimiento, en esta lucha por la justicia y la verdad, una clave, un elemento decisivo de la movilización colectiva.
El silencio de la palabra cede su lugar a la voz de la tierra.
Todo lenguaje poético de alguna manera rompe la univocidad y lo unívoco de los lenguajes políticos y permite volver a ver la realidad en su profundidad, en su horror y en su humanidad.
Habíamos conocido de frente el dolor de la gente. Cuando escuchas a una madre, cuando escuchas a un hermano, cuando escuchas a un padre que no puede expresar el dolor. Empecé a descubrir un México que no conocía, ¿no? Personas que estaban realmente dolidas y realmente sin esperanzas, sin respuestas, con mucha impunidad, con un Estado que aplastaba y volvía indigno al humano, ¿no? O sea, había un abandono muy profundo y una desesperación. Yo sentí eso, sentí una desesperación muy profunda de la gente y mía. Encontramos algo muy doloroso, pero muy esperanzador también. Era una mezcla de sentimientos muy profunda, ¿no? Era ese dolor, pero esa esperanza también.
Javier Sicilia obligó al Estado a votar una ley de víctimas y también, a su manera, forzó a un país a mirar de frente el drama que estaba viviendo.
Con el drama, digamos, del exterminio de la delincuencia, del delito común, hubo una posibilidad de que la gente pudiera desterrorizarse por un periodo, por un momento, y fuera capaz de confrontar a la autoridad para decir ya basta, ¿no? Creo que fue un momento importante en la historia de las movilizaciones en México. Fue una coyuntura histórica de mucha acumulación de 2, 3 años, ya no de miedo, sino de terror en la gente, muy fuerte. Y entonces no se veía cómo poder expresar esto ante la autoridad porque iba creciendo la violencia y la agresión del delito organizado. Y entonces la coyuntura de un personaje como Javier, perteneciente a lo que uno podría llamar la reserva moral de este país, en el área del arte, de la literatura y sobre todo de miles y miles de víctimas que vieron la posibilidad al escuchar las palabras de Javier un poco de decir, bueno, estoy en la misma situación, amplíame el micrófono para que yo también pueda tener una esperanza de volver a encontrar o resolver un caso de muerte de un familiar.
El terror adormece también, el terror busca escapar por salidas que nos llevan a la indiferencia, a una aparente indiferencia, pero que están dormidas como fuerzas vivas. Verdaderamente, mientras a un pueblo no se le mata el alma completamente, la fuerza moral, la reserva moral, está allí aguardando algo que lo detone, ¿no?
El movimiento por la paz con justicia y dignidad hizo progresar la conciencia colectiva. Comparte junto al movimiento zapatista que salió a la luz hace más de 20 años con el subcomandante Marcos, un privilegio poco común: concitar la atención, revelar, denunciar, dejar al desnudo la verdad con la fuerza de la palabra poética, una suerte de mediación mágica entre la violencia y el anhelo de justicia.
Los dos grandes movimientos de los últimos 20 años que tienen una posición moral indiscutible fueron generados con un lenguaje poético, ¿no? En el caso del zapatismo, el de Marcos, fue con los indios, las comunidades indígenas. En el caso del Movimiento por la Paz, fue las víctimas de esta guerra que desató Felipe Calderón contra el narcotráfico, pues, ¿no? Y creo que ambos movimientos, con diferentes lenguajes poéticos, pero siempre utilizando pues, los recursos de la poesía, ¿no? Las imágenes, los símbolos, las metáforas, funcionaron, ¿no? Y develaron un horror que estaba oculto bajo los lenguajes unívocos de lo político, bajo la abstracción de la estadística, y develaron también la responsabilidad del Estado frente a esa humanidad negada, ¿no?
Tocaremos la puerta cerrada, no la puerta hacia el vacío, sino la que conduce a la antesala de las cosas extraviadas, la paz, la confianza, el amor.
La poesía nace de lo más profundo, de lo humano. La poesía está allí, en el centro de ese corazón, y eso es lo que le ha permitido a ambos movimientos pues hacer lo que han podido hacer por las víctimas, consolarlas, darles dignidad, darles vida, y contra el crimen organizado y contra el Estado, desde ahí el señalamiento de su inhumanidad, de su terrible desprecio, ¿no? Y de las deudas, sobre todo la del Estado, que tienen con las víctimas o con las víctimas estructurales, como son los indígenas.
Con el apoyo de autoridades civiles y militares, cómo posteriormente fue torturada,
violada durante muchos días y decapitada a sangre fría.
Ya no hay que llamar a la policía, hay que llamar a la poesía ciudadana, ¿no? La sensibilización a través de la poesía jugó un papel importantísimo.
Fue una construcción de intuiciones maravillosas, poéticas, que hicieron posible que esto que ya estaba en la intuición, que ya estaba en el nombre de mi hijo Juan Francisco y de sus amigos, empezara a ser la palabra y el nombre de todos, con sus respectivos apellidos, nombres e historias.
Esas historias, esos nombres, esos casos que no tenían ni voz ni derecho, es justamente lo que la caravana de Javier Sicilia irá descubriendo en el largo periplo por un México de pie y dolido. Un viaje donde no faltó ni el amor, ni la alegría, ni la risa, ni los payasos.
Empiezas como a vivir realmente todo lo que uno sabía en carne propia.
Y tuvimos que confrontar esa inmensa cobardía, ese inmenso cinismo, tanto del Estado como de los criminales, ¿no? Y lo desafiamos desde nuestra pequeñez y con esa pobre arma que se llama el amor y la dignidad.
Este dolor, estas muertes, esta visibilidad es como el arte del mimo. Tú puedes ver aquí una pared y racionalmente sabemos que no está. Que no se puede tocar, pero que se puede crear y que lo puedes lograr que el resto del mundo lo vea. Y a través de la risa puedes, a través de esto o sin esto, puedes estar feliz de que el otro lo haya visto. A mí nunca me ha gustado la palabra desaparecidos, porque están más presentes que nunca gracias a estas caravanas. Porque cada vez que dices desaparecido, lo estás recreando.
A la hora de contabilizar los logros del movimiento, quedan varias evidencias. Una, la visibilidad, el reconocimiento de la responsabilidad del Estado y la implicación ya evidente de los órganos de seguridad en los crímenes cometidos.
Creo que el Movimiento por la Paz lo que dio es rostro a esos pasos de discusión, de saber qué es lo que estaba pasando, que se empezaban a contar por organizaciones o por especialistas y que más tarde, a través de las historias que se han visibilizado mucho en los medios de comunicación, es lo que ha ido marcando que estas cifras tienen un rostro, tienen una historia.
Yo soy madre de 4 hijos que están desaparecidos y no sé nada de ellos.
Fueron víctimas o de las autoridades y de las policías estatales, locales, o de las Fuerzas Armadas o del delito organizado. Un elemento fundamental inicial es se recuperaron los nombres, las historias personales y la dignidad de las víctimas.
Juan Julián Fernández Álvarez no debió morir.
No debieron morir.
Paz con justicia y dignidad es en principio en lo que nos hemos puesto de acuerdo. Este es antes que nada un movimiento por la paz.
Estamos en un México muy lastimado, muy acosado también y da miedo hablar. Y lo que rompió Javier fue el miedo a expresarse, el miedo a salir. Era un México, es todavía, pero era en ese entonces mucho más un México dormido.
Quieren acabar con el miedo, pero no nos van a ganar. Somos más los que queremos un mejor país. Nadie nos va a ganar. Difunde esa imagen. Que reaccionen las conciencias de la gente. Que no se queden callados. Que alcen la voz o nos van a hundir cada día más. ¡Basta! ¡Basta! Estamos hartos. No nomás de la delincuencia, sino de corruptos.
¿Cuándo?
Y en los primeros diálogos de paz con el gobierno mexicano, en el peor momento de la narcoviolencia, las autoridades fueron capaces de decir mucho más que lo inadmisible.
El primer diálogo con el presidente Calderón, que atrevió a decir por qué no le reclaman a los narcos, fue cuando yo le respondí, le dije, bueno, pues dígame que no hay Estado y nosotros nos arreglamos con los criminales, pero hasta donde yo sé, un Estado tiene que responder por esto, ¿no? Por las víctimas, por la seguridad, por la paz, por la justicia.
¿Cómo el Estado va a esgrimir otro argumento si sus mismos órganos de seguridad están implicados en la violencia? Son un eje del espiral sangriento.
Ante la afirmación de que la estrategia de seguridad pública del gobierno ha empeorado las cosas, yo creo que al contrario, serían peores si no hubiéramos intervenido.
Y fueron víctimas o de las autoridades y de las policías estatales, locales, o de las Fuerzas Armadas o del delito organizado. Un elemento fundamental inicial es se recuperaron los nombres, las historias personales y la dignidad de las víctimas.
Por lo menos ya no pueden ocultar el dolor, ni ocultar el horror, y tienen que, si tenemos todavía esa capacidad y esa fuerza moral, tendrán que resarcirlo y encontrar una ruta de justicia y de paz. Cuando un pueblo se une y desafía a un Estado que no está cumpliendo con la voluntad de ese pueblo, empezamos a vivir la democracia. Eso es lo que sucedió con las movilizaciones. Un pueblo entero, izquierdas, derechas, salió a decirle al Estado y a los criminales, así no, hijos de la chingada. Perdón la palabra, pero son exactas. Y en ese momento el Estado tuvo miedo y en ese momento vivimos un momento democrático. Fue la presidencia, fue el poder político el que buscó y dijo dialoguemos. Y les dijimos dialogamos pero en nuestras condiciones. No dialogamos en lo oscuro, no dialogamos a puertas cerradas, dialogamos frente a la nación porque este es un tema de la nación. Es un tema que nos compete a todos. Es una emergencia y una tragedia humanitaria que vive la nación y lo dirimimos de cara a la nación. Y así fueron los diálogos, ¿no? Cambiamos un lenguaje, cambiamos una relacionalidad con el poder. Le hablamos al poder de tú a tú y los confrontamos como lo que son servidores de esta nación, servidores de la ciudadanía, ¿no?
La toma de conciencia de la autoridad creo que fue muy precaria. Sí, por supuesto que recibió una confrontación, un contraste, que los testimonios directos de los familiares